Treat yourself. Find your work-life balance. Prioritize your comfort. Take a mental health day. We are currently living in the most comfortable, pampered, physically safe period in the entire history of human civilization. You can order a feast to your door with the push of a button. You can control the exact temperature of your room. You have access to endless, on-demand entertainment to numb your mind the moment you feel a single ounce of boredom. Society has built an entire ecosystem designed to eliminate friction from your life. We are told that the ultimate goal of human existence is to maximize pleasure, minimize pain, and seek constant, uninterrupted happiness. Consider how thin the margin of discomfort in an average day has actually become. Hungry, and food arrives before the hunger has any chance to register as more than a mild inconvenience. Bored, and a screen produces an infinite, frictionless stream of stimulation before boredom can finish forming a single, complete thought. Slightly too warm or too cold, and a thermostat erases the sensation before the body has to do any work adjusting to it. None of this is inherently sinister. Comfort itself was never the enemy. The danger is what happens to a nervous system that has never once been asked to tolerate even a few unpleasant minutes, because the world it operates in has been engineered, almost without anyone planning it that way, to remove every single one of those minutes before they can teach it anything. But look at the devastating psychological toll of this comfort. Look at the modern man. Despite having every luxury our ancestors could only dream of, we are drowning in an epidemic of depression, anxiety, and profound emptiness. Why? Because human beings were not designed to exist in a padded room. When you systematically remove all friction, struggle, and discomfort from your life, you do not achieve peace. You achieve decay. You become dull, you become soft, and most dangerously, you lose your lethal edge. In the year 1645, in a dark, cold cave in Japan, a man was dying. He was entirely alone, suffering from a painful illness, and he had stripped himself of all worldly possessions. But this was not an ordinary man. This was Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest, most terrifyingly undefeated swordsman in Japanese history. A man who fought 61 death matches against the most elite warriors of his time and walked away from every single one of them breathing. Those 61 duels did not happen in comfortable conditions, against opponents who agreed to fight on his terms. Many of them happened in his teenage years and 20s, in a country still bleeding from a century of civil war, where a samurai's entire status, income, and family honor could be erased by a single afternoon's miscalculation. He fought in rain, in mud. On islands he had to swim or row to reach, sometimes arriving deliberately late or poorly equipped, precisely because he understood that an opponent rattled by an unconventional approach was an opponent who had already lost half the fight in his own head before a single blade was drawn. Comfort was never available to him in these years, even if he had wanted it. By the time he reached old age, refusing comfort was no longer a survival necessity. It had become a discipline he chose on purpose, long after he had any practical need to prove anything to anyone. Picture what that final cave actually was. Regando, a stone cave on a mountainside, where a man who had spent his entire life surrounded by motion, duels, travel, students, war, chose at the very end to surround himself with nothing at all. No comfortable deathbed, no attendants fussing over his condition, no final luxury purchased with the wealth and fame his reputation could easily have bought him. He had been the most feared duelist in the country, a man whose name alone made other swordsmen reconsider a challenge. And he spent his final days exactly the way he had spent his training, stripped down, alone, facing the one opponent even he could not defeat. A week before he took his final breath, Musashi did not ask for a comfortable bed. He did not seek out medicine to numb his pain. He did not ask for company. Instead, he picked up his brush and wrote a short, razor-sharp manuscript containing 21 rules for life. He called it the Dokkodo, the Path of Aloneness. The Dokkodo is not a self-help book. It is a psychological weapon. It is a blueprint for becoming an entirely unbreakable human being. And the second rule Musashi wrote is a direct, brutal attack on everything the modern world stands for. He wrote, "Do not seek pleasure for its own sake." The rules that surround it are just as merciless, and almost none of them ever make it onto a motivational poster. He wrote that he would have no fixed home. He wrote that he would not regret what he had done. He wrote that he would not depend on a half-hearted resolve when facing adversity. Read across all 21 lines together, and a pattern emerges that should terrify anyone who has organized their entire life around comfort, stability, and the avoidance of regret. This was a man systematically removing every single soft place his mind could have collapsed into, one rule at a time, until there was nothing left to retreat to except whatever discipline he had actually built. To the modern mind, intoxicated by dopamine and addicted to self-care, This rule sounds like a miserable way to live. Why would you deliberately avoid pleasure? Why would you reject the good things in life? But Musashi understood a biological and psychological reality that you are actively ignoring. He knew that comfort is a silent assassin. Every time you seek a cheap hit of pleasure, every time you choose the warm bed over the cold morning, the junk food over the discipline, the mind-numbing scrolling over the deep work, you are voluntarily surrendering a piece of your strength. You are training your nervous system to collapse at the first sign of resistance. Musashi lived a life of deliberate, extreme hardship. He famously refused to bathe in hot water because he did not want to be caught unarmed while seeking comfort. He slept on cold, hard floors. He dressed in simple, rough clothing. He intentionally conditioned his mind to be completely detached from luxury, so that when he was standing inches away from a razor-sharp blade aimed at his throat, his mind would not panic. He had already conquered the desire for comfort, which meant he had absolutely no fear of pain. When you make comfort your master, you become a hostage to it. If your entire existence is built around avoiding friction, what happens when the friction inevitably finds you? When the market crashes, when your business fails, when a crisis hits your family, you cannot take a mental health day from reality. The universe does not care about your work-life balance. The universe is a beautifully violent, chaotic arena, and if you have spent your life wrapping yourself in bubble wrap, the slightest impact will shatter your bones. There is a name modern science has given to the exact mechanism Musashi was exploiting 4 centuries before anyone studied it in a lab. Researchers call it hedonic adaptation, the well-documented finding that human beings rapidly recalibrate their baseline of normal around whatever level of comfort they are consistently exposed to. Win the lottery, and within roughly a year, most people's reported happiness returns almost exactly to where it was before the windfall, because the brain simply built a new, more expensive normal around the money. Live in air-conditioned comfort every single day, and a single hot afternoon without it starts to feel like a genuine crisis. Even though humans survive for tens of thousands of years with no climate control whatsoever, your nervous system does not have a fixed tolerance for discomfort. It has a sliding one, constantly recalibrating around whatever you feed it most often. Every time you choose the easier option, you are not simply enjoying a moment of relief. You are quietly lowering your own threshold for what counts as suffering, which means the next inconvenience will register as a slightly bigger crisis than the one before it, in an accelerating spiral that has nothing to do with how genuinely difficult your life actually is. The modern self-care industry is selling you poison disguised as medicine. They tell you that when you feel overwhelmed, you should step back, indulge yourself, escape. But Musashi teaches us that true self-care is not a spa day. True self-care is building a mind so devastatingly strong, so calloused and unbreakable, that it no longer requires an escape from reality. Look closely at the actual incentive structure underneath this industry before you trust its advice. A multi-billion-dollar wellness economy does not profit when you become so resilient that you stop needing its products. It profits when discomfort feels like an emergency requiring an immediate purchase. A candle, a subscription, a retreat, a supplement, a piece of merchandise with a soothing slogan printed on it. The industry's healthiest possible customer, from a purely commercial standpoint, is someone who feels overwhelmed often enough to keep buying relief, never quite resilient enough to stop needing it. This does not mean every wellness product is a scam, or that rest itself is a trick. It means the loudest voices telling you to constantly prioritize comfort over friction have a financial interest in your discomfort threshold, staying exactly where it is or getting lower, never higher. Musashi never had a sponsor. His only incentive was staying alive against a blade, which tends to produce considerably more honest advice than an algorithm optimizing for your next purchase. Think about how a katana is forged. You do not create a legendary razor-sharp blade by treating the steel gently. You do not give the steel a break. You thrust it into a blindingly hot fire, you drag it out, and you smash it repeatedly with a heavy iron hammer. You heat it, you beat it, you plunge it into freezing water, over and over again. It is the violence of the process that purifies the metal. It is the extreme, unrelenting stress that gives the blade its lethal edge. Your mind operates on the exact same principle. You are the steel. But right now, you are refusing the fire and hiding from the hammer. There is a word for this in modern biology, borrowed from an old Greek term for setting in motion. Hormesis, the phenomenon where a low controlled dose of stress makes a biological system stronger rather than weaker. This is not poetry. It is the literal mechanism behind nearly every physical adaptation your body is capable of. Lift a weight heavier than your muscles can comfortably handle, and the microscopic damage this causes is exactly what triggers the muscle to rebuild itself larger and stronger than before. Expose your skin to controlled doses of sunlight, and it builds pigment specifically to defend against the next exposure. Starve your body briefly through fasting, and it triggers cellular repair processes that simple comfort never activates. Every system in the human body that gets stronger does so by being deliberately, briefly broken down first. There is no version of strength, anywhere in biology, that arrives without some controlled encounter with stress. The katana was never a metaphor stretched to fit a convenient narrative. It is a literal description of how every resilient system in nature, including the one inside your skull, actually works. It is worth noticing, too, how precisely this mirrors the mechanism behind Bodhidharma's wall and the Hagakure's morning meditation on death, two teachings already covered elsewhere on this channel. Bodhidharma's stillness and Tsunetomo's rehearsed catastrophe were never about avoiding discomfort either. They were controlled doses of exactly the kind of psychological stress hormesis describes: small, repeated, voluntary encounters with something difficult, administered on your own terms, rather than waiting for life to administer an uncontrolled dose at the worst possible time. Musashi's cold floors and Bodhidharma's cave and Tsunetomo's imagined death are not three unrelated extremes. They are three different dosing schedules of the exact same medicine. It is worth noticing how often this principle gets rediscovered, repackaged, and sold back to people who have spent years avoiding the very discomfort it requires. Cold exposure, once simply something Musashi did because hot water made him feel vulnerable, now arrives as an expensive plunge tank with an app attached. Fasting, once just what happened during lean seasons or disciplined religious practice, now arrives as a branded protocol with a subscription tier. None of this makes the underlying science less real. It simply means the same lesson keeps surfacing in every era, dressed differently, because comfort keeps winning the daily argument inside most people's heads. And every few years, someone has to repackage the same 400-year-old discipline as a trend before anyone is willing to try it. Walking the path of aloneness does not mean you have to abandon your family and move into a cave. In the modern world, it is a psychological stance. It means you deliberately detach yourself from the crowd's desperate addiction to comfort. When everyone else is sleeping in, you wake up in the cold dark. When everyone else is seeking the path of least resistance, you actively seek out the friction. You skip the cheap dopamine. You take the cold shower. You sit at your desk in absolute agonizing boredom and force yourself to do the deep, invisible work that nobody else is willing to do. You stop complaining about how hard the journey is because you realize that the hardship is not an obstacle. The hardship is the entire point. Musashi won 61 death matches because while his opponents were resting, celebrating, indulging in the pleasures of life, he was alone in the woods, swinging a heavy wooden sword thousands of times until his hands bled. He outlasted them because he had already suffered more in his training than they could ever inflict upon him in a fight. Picture two people facing the exact same stressful year, a difficult launch, a demanding goal, a year that was always going to ask something hard of both of them. The first person has spent the years leading up to this one optimizing almost exclusively for comfort. Soft mornings, the path of least resistance whenever a choice presents itself, a phone always within reach to soften any unstructured minute. In month one of the difficult year, this barely matters. Momentum and adrenaline carry him through the early stretch the same way they would carry almost anyone. When the first real obstacle of the difficult year arrives, around month 3, a client pulls out, a deadline tightens without warning. It does not register to him as a normal, survivable setback. It registers as a crisis because his nervous system has spent years calibrating itself around the assumption that discomfort this size simply doesn't happen to him. He reaches immediately for relief, a binge of distraction, a vent session that goes in circles without producing a decision, a declaration that he needs to step back and recharge before he can even look at the problem directly. The recharge stretches longer than planned because rest, to a nervous system that has never practiced tolerating discomfort, starts to feel like the only acceptable state. By month 6, a second setback lands on top of the first one, before he has even finished recovering from it, and this time the spiral is harder to climb out of. He starts missing commitments, apologizing more than producing, quietly wondering whether the entire goal was simply too ambitious for someone like him. By month 9, he has technically not quit, but he has also not meaningfully moved forward in 3 months, trapped in a loop of minor crisis followed by extended recovery followed by another minor crisis, none of which would have qualified as a crisis at all to someone whose baseline tolerance sat even slightly higher. The second person has spent the same years deliberately practicing small, controlled doses of friction. The cold mornings, the harder workout, the deep work sessions with no escape hatch available. None of it was about punishment. It was about keeping the nervous system's threshold for discomfort calibrated against something real, rather than letting it drift downward by default. In month 1 of the difficult year, she looks almost identical to the first person from the outside. Same goals, same energy, same hope for a smooth launch. The difference becomes visible at month 3 when the same obstacle hits. The client pulling out, the tightened deadline. Something interesting happens. It registers as exactly what it is, an inconvenient solvable problem, not an emergency. She feels the same initial jolt of stress the first person feels. The difference is that her baseline tolerance starts from a higher floor, so the same jolt does not push her past her capacity to function. She solves the problem and keeps moving. By month 6, when a second setback would normally compound the first, there is no first setback still lingering to compound. She closed that chapter in days, not months. By month 9, while the first person is still cycling through crisis and recovery, she has absorbed 3 separate setbacks of comparable size to his, with no extended recovery period after any of them, simply because nothing has actually broken her in the first place. The work she has produced in 9 months is not just larger than his, it is the kind of output that was never available to someone whose nervous system treats every obstacle as a 5-alarm fire. You must become a person who thrives in the harsh winter of the mind. You must learn to look at suffering, at difficulty, at the exhausting grind of your ambitions, and smile with the cold satisfaction of a warrior who knows he is forging his own blade. This is the 8th piece of the same weapon this channel keeps assembling. Musashi already taught you discipline without feeling, and now, from the same source, the channel adds one more layer, strength without comfort. Lao Tzu removed force from outcome. Tsunetomo removed hope from fear. Sun Tzu removed information from exposure. Krishna removed avoidance from duty. Bodhidharma removed escape from attention. Han Feizi removed sentiment from structure. And now, on his deathbed, Musashi removes comfort from survival. Every one of these lessons points at the same uncomfortable conclusion, found independently across a dozen centuries. Anything you cannot live without is something the world can use to control you, and the only mind that cannot be controlled is the one that has already practiced losing every comfort it thought it needed. Tomorrow morning, walk the Dokkodo. Find one comfort that you rely on every single day, a comfort that makes you soft, and ruthlessly eliminate it. Deny your flesh what it wants. Take back control of your nervous system. Prove to yourself that you are the master of your vessel, not a slave to your impulses. Understand that this is not an instruction to despise rest itself, or to treat every moment of relaxation as a moral failure. Musashi was not a man who never slept, never ate well when food was available, never enjoyed a quiet evening. The rule was never reject all pleasure forever. It was do not seek pleasure for its own sake, meaning do not let the pursuit of comfort become the organizing principle around which the rest of your life gets arranged. Rest that restores you so you can return to the work is not the enemy here. Rest that has quietly become the entire point, the thing you are constantly engineering your life around protecting, is exactly what Musashi spent his whole life refusing to become a hostage to. The distinction matters because it is the exact place people misapply a teaching like this. Some will hear, embrace discomfort, and conclude that exhaustion itself is virtuous, collapsing into a different kind of imbalance entirely, refusing legitimate rest, treating burnout as a badge of honor, mistaking self-punishment for self-mastery. That is not what kept Musashi alive through 61 death matches. A duelist who never allowed his body to recover would have died in his first decade of fighting, not his 7th. The discipline was never the absence of recovery. It was the absence of dependence, the difference between a body that rests because it has earned the rest, and a mind that has quietly arranged its entire existence around never having to feel anything difficult at all. One produces a blade that holds an edge for decades. The other produces steel that was never properly forged in the first place, soft from the moment it left the fire. Stop asking for a lighter burden and start building broader, stronger shoulders. The crowd is huddled around the fire, telling each other comforting lies, slowly growing weak. But you do not belong there anymore. The wind is howling. The path is entirely empty. Draw your blade, step out into the cold, and get to work.